Hello folks, and welcome to another Richard Head Longbows video. And we actually have the pleasure of Richard with us here today on one side or the other. These are our Zoom chats that we do where we talk about longbows and arrows and other archery related things. If you've never been to the channel before, we make bows and arrows for a living and we make videos about them. So please do like and subscribe if that sounds like something that you're interested in. And today's topic is warming up your bow before shooting it. This is something we get asked about, well, quite a lot, actually. Probably a couple of times a month it seems to crop up somewhere or other, either by someone phoning us or seeing us at a shoot or on the internet. And that's where we've seen it today. I don't think we've ever done a dedicated video on it. We have mentioned it occasionally in one of our aforementioned bow making videos, but I don't think we've ever dedicated some actual time to it. The question really is, I think what people are really asking is, do they need to do something to prepare the bow prior to shooting it in anger, so to speak? Do they need to do some tentative short draws, or do they need to physically warm the bow up, perhaps if it's cold? Anyway, it's, not something that I've ever bothered doing, and that's not surprising because I was brought up in archery by the other person that's on the screen now, and he never told me to do that, so that's why I've never done it. But Richard, have you ever warmed up a longbow before shooting it?
You were shooting compound bows. You don't need to bother.
I've shot everything. I started off shooting recurve and compound.
You did, yes. Yes, a little jog, little recurve. Anyway, rubbing the bow, part drawing. If it's part of your pre-shoot routine, it's not going to do any harm whatsoever. And if you're happy to do it and you feel you need to do it, great. It's not going to harm the bow. It may do some good. That's open to question. The first thing, rubbing the bow. I just happen to have a bow here. So you'll see people before a shoot put their hand on the bow and then rub it up and down. What's it doing? It's warming your hand up. Might be warming the surface of the bow, but is that heat getting through to the core of the bow? Very unlikely. I thought, why are people doing this? And perhaps it's some words of wisdom that have been passed down through the ages. And I thought, well, what would they have done in the Middle Ages when they didn't have varnish to put on the bow to keep moisture out? They used wax, beeswax, and they had a cloth impregnated with wax, and they built up a real thick crust of wax on the bow to keep moisture out. And no doubt they'd have had a cloth impregnated with wax, so before they went for a shoot, or they had this in their pouch or in their tucked into their belt, they had a cloth impregnated with wax, and they give it a rub occasionally to soften the wax and spread it around and stop moisture getting into the bow. I think that's possibly where this has come from. Well, we'll wonder what Roger Askham had to say about it. So put that back. So I got his book, which is Toxophilus. If anyone hasn't heard of it, it was written by Roger Askham in the 1500s. He was tutor to Elizabeth I, and he wrote this book for Henry VIII. And it contains a lot of wisdom of the time on longbows, how they were made, arrows, and how to shoot them and how to look after them. And let's see what he says. He's talking about bows breaking and how you break them by overdrawing them, by catching them in the wheels of a cart or whatever it might have been at the time. The equivalent of the car door now, or the boot of the car, which happens more often than you might imagine. Anyway, he says, moreover, there is another thing which will soon cause a bow to be broken by one of the three ways which we have spoken of, and that is shooting in winter, when there is any frost. Frost is wheresoever is any waterish humour, as is in all woods, either more or less, and you know that all things frozen and icy will rather break than bend. Yet, if a man must needs about at any such time, let him take his bow and bring it to the fire, and there, little by little, rub and chafe it with a waxed cloth. Now, I'm not suggesting you light a fire when you're ready on the old tournament line. I
Oh,
think
go
you
on.
might yeah, we recommend it. So you're not going to be able to do that. But obviously, Askham was talking to people either in their castle or in their hovel. They could hold their bow by the fire. Obviously, had a fire going during the winter, and physically warm the bow. You're not going to do that by rubbing it with your hand. So physically warms the bow, and then rubs it with this wax cloth, again, as I said, to keep the moisture out. And that's what he's talking about. And then that shall bring it to a point that he may shoot safely enough in it. This rubbing with wax, as I've said before, is a great succor against all wet and moistness. In the fields also, in going betwixt the pricks, that's the shooting marks, either with your hand or else with a cloth, you must keep your bow in such a temper. I think that's referring to this wax cloth and keeping that coat of wax to keep the moisture out. So that may be where this has come from, that people think they rub the bow and warming it up. It's not. They should be using a wax cloth. And some people making bows do use just a wax finish on the bow. And if that's what you've got, then a good idea to have a wax cloth and give it a rub. So I think that's where that probably comes from, which is interesting.
So this is more really a bow that hasn't got what we would call a proper seal on it, which we would use varnish, and also very well seasoned wood, and it's not being stored in a castle where it's getting frozen and full of water and all the other things that may then require you to heat it by a fire, which you don't need to do now unless you are living in those sort of circumstances. But to give an example, we've sold several bows to people who are, well, there was a guy in Canada, wasn't there? He sent us photos of him out in sub-zero temperatures, out on his horse, punting in the woods with his bow, with absolutely no problems whatsoever.
No problem at all. Yeah. So
and he
giving the bow a rub with your hand, if you want to do it, fine. It's not going to do any harm at all.
No.
And as people have said, that helps you perhaps find a little lift that might be occurring in the back of the bow.
Yeah.
Great. Doesn't do any harm to do that. But that's
any habit where you can actually physically check the bow is a good thing. It's something that was suggested to me when I first started driving, is that people make sure you hand clean your car. If you do it by hand, that's when you notice tires are bald. It's when you notice your tires are bald. It's when you notice that there's a problem. It's when you see underneath the car that you see there's a drip or some problem. But if you're never ever touching your bow other than to shoot it, if you're never doing any maintenance on it, then you aren't going to notice those sorts of things. So if that gets people in the habit of doing so. But I think the again, going back to the original question here, the problem is, it going to stop the bow breaking? People are perhaps a little scared that I'm coming out with the bow cold. I haven't used it for 2 weeks. I'm going to start shooting with it straight away. Do I need to bend it a couple of times, a tiny little bit, before drawing it fully? Well, in our experience, that's never been an issue. And it's something I've never, ever done. And the vast majority of the people I know have never, ever done. We don't recommend it. We're not saying that it's wrong. But we don't sell our bows with a preparatory leaflet saying that you must draw the bow a few times and you must warm it up and all these sorts of things. When we tiller a bow, it's drawn thousands of times. I mean, that's what the tillering process is getting the piece of wood used to bending in a particular way. We have given advice, and we've done videos on this. If you left the bow for, say, 6 months or a year and you haven't used it, then yes, it might be wise to either get the bow looked at if you're not too sure about it, or indeed brace the bow up and do a few tentative pulls. But we're not talking about something that you need to do every time you shoot your bow, every time that you get the bow out, that you need to somehow do some preparatory work on drawing the bow, because it might snap if you draw it back. The way bows break, the majority of what we see, and Richard just hinted at it then, is where people put it, where people physically damage the bow by trapping it in a door. and also lending it to somebody else who's got a different style of draw to you or a different draw length is usually how a bow breaks, or simply because there's a flaw in the wood. Whenever we have a bow come back to us that's broken, which thankfully is very few, those would be out of business, it's that there was a flaw inside the wood, or the bow was very, very old and the wood has started to fail and it started perhaps delaminating. Those are 99% of the reasons of why a bow breaks. I don't want people to be frightened into thinking that they need to warm up the bow and that they need to do preparatory draws of the bow before coming up to full draw. But as Richard said, if you want to do it, it's not actually going to do any harm. But people asking the question, will it make any difference? Will it save the bow? No, it probably won't make any difference. And will it save the bow? Again, probably not. That's probably not the reason your bow is going to break, other than the reasons that I've just mentioned.
Yeah. And I know at field shoots, while I'm waiting for the whistle to start the shoot, I might draw the bow a few times, but not necessarily for the sake of the bow, but starting to warm my muscles up, which is probably more important. Making sure we're pointing somewhere. Because I think, I stand to be corrected on this, I think GNES or Archery GB, as it is now in their rules, say you must not draw the bow unless you're standing on the shooting line, pointing towards the targets, whether you've got an arrow in the bow or not. So I think if you're back behind the shooting line, you start drawing the bow, I think that's against the rules. I stand to be corrected. I've not read the rules for a long time, but that was certainly something I was aware of. So just be wary of that. But certainly, when I've been field shooting, you're standing out in the woods, perhaps on a cold winter's morning, waiting to start. A few draws starts to warm your muscles up as much as anything else. But you don't need to do it for the bow. But as Philip said, if it's part of your shooting pre-shoot routine and you feel comfortable and you'd rather do it. It's not going to do any harm. No,
this is it. I think it's, I don't know why it's become one of these contentious things. We're not the arbiters of all knowledge, and we're never ever going to come on here and saying you should do exactly what we say, that we're right and you're wrong. We're not that sort of people. We're not that sort of company. So if you want to do it, that's fine. But if you're asking our opinion, will it make any difference? Probably not, is the answer. As I say, the examples we've given before, people have bought our bows and have reported back from various parts of the world in extreme cold temperatures we're talking about, very cold, with no issue whatsoever. And as Richard said there, unfortunately, the majority of problems, the majority of times people come back is to say, can you reduce the weight of this bow or something like that, because they've hurt themselves from shooting and have hurt their shoulder or their elbow or hurt their wrist or dislocated a finger or whatever it is, because the vast majority of people, you watch the next time you go to the shoot and you see if anyone does any sort of warming up before spending a day drawing 50 pounds backwards and forwards to their face all day. See, you count how many people actually do warm up, and I bet you won't even fill a hand full of people that actually bother to warm up. Yeah, if you go to a gym and you're going to pull 50 pounds, I don't know what that is in kilos, and you're going to start lifting that above your head or pulling it up from the floor, I suspect that most people would want to do some sort of warming up before doing that. So, yeah, I think it's as Richard said, I think it's one of those things that people have got into a habit of doing. And if that's a nice ceremony, I think like the footballers who might have a lucky rabbit's foot or I think it's one of those things that's got into people's subconscious to do prior to shooting, then it kind of doesn't matter really. And people should chill out about the whole situation. I don't know why everyone's worrying about it quite so much. Enjoy shooting. So there we are, folks. Is it something that you do? Do you rub the bow to, say, warm it up? Do you do a few tentative little draws before you go at it and draw the bow fully? Have you perhaps got any evidence? Have you done tests over 10, 15 different bows over a period of time? And some you've shot where you've not done any preparatory work, and some where you've just shot them straight away, because quite frankly, that's what you would need to do to really find if there was any sort of real validity in the thing. So yeah, let us know in the comments below, and we'll look forward to seeing what you've got to say. Thanks for watching, folks, and we'll see you again soon.